Shabbat Shalom. We welcome you to the Lehrman Chapel here at Temple Ohev Shalom as we prepare for this week's Shabbat service. I am joined by our musical accompanist, organist, and all-around good guy, Christopher Prestia. And let's begin with a cleansing breath. I don't know how you are the week before Rosh Hashanah, but Rabbi needs a cleansing breath, so why don't you join me? Everybody, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's welcome Shabbat by lighting our Shabbat candles. Let's turn to page 121. As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we by our lives give light to all who behold us. As the brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we in our own day be among those who kindle light. Page 127. There are days when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain. On Shabbat, we seek not to acquire but to share. There are days when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted. On Shabbat, we stand in wonder before the mystery of creation. There are days when we act as if we cared nothing for the rights of others. On Shabbat, we remember that justice is our duty and a better world our goal. So we embrace Shabbat, day of rest, day of wonder, day of peace. Shalom Aleichem is on page 142. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaSharet. Turn to page 264 for Baruch Hu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, b'chochma poteach she'arim, u'vitfuna mishane itim, u'machalif et hazmanim, u'misader et ha'kochavim, b'mishmerotehem barakia kirtsono. Borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, u'ma'avir yom u'mevi layla, Umabdil ben yom uven laila, Adonai Tsevaot Shemo, El Chai v'Kayam, Tamid Yimloch Aleinu Leolam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai, Hama'ariv Aravim. Page 266. In each age we receive and transmit Torah. At each moment we are addressed by the world. In each age we are challenged by our ancient teaching. At each moment we stand face to face with truth. In each age we add our wisdom to that which has gone before. At each moment the knowing heart is filled with wonder. In each age the children of Torah become its builders and seek to set the world firm on a foundation of truth. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema is on page 267. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Ve'ahavta, page 268. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levacha ubechol nafshecha ubechol meyodecha vehayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha veshinantam levanecha vedibarta bam Beshiftecha bebetecha, uvlechtecha vaderech, uvshochbecha uvkumecha, ukshartam leot ayedecha, vehayu letotafot beinenecha, uktavtam al mezuzot betecha uvisharecha, leman tizkaru va'asitem et kol mitzvotai, Vitem Kedoshim Lelohechem, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Asher Hotzeiti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Liot Lachem Lelohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem. Page 269. We worship the power that unites the universe, a promise of harmony for all. Yet that oneness eludes our grasp as imperfection and evil abound. Before our eyes there is a vision of perfection, order, and goodness. There is evil enough to break the heart, and there is good enough to exalt the soul. When will redemption come? When we grant everyone what we claim for ourselves. Long ago we escaped the tyranny of Egypt. Our people saw the power of the Most High. We learned God's presence redeems time and event. So we celebrate this power that makes for freedom. V'chamocha, page 270. And if you have a prayer book handy, let's turn to page 271 and join together. Give us a place to rest, O God. Shelter us in the long, soft evening shadows of your truth. You are true protection and safety. In your presence we find love and acceptance. Watch over us as we go forth. Prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace over all we love, over our Jerusalem and yours. Baruch atah Adonai, הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו, ועל כל עמו ישראל, ועל ירושלים. V'shamru, page 272. V'shamru, v'nei Yisrael, ha-Shabbat, lamsot et ha-Shabbat, לדור תמיד גדולה. V'shamru, v'nei Yisrael, ha-Shabbat, lamsot et ha-Shabbat, לדור תמיד גדולה. בני ובן בני ישראל, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות הברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות הברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וירבש, שבת וירבש, שבת וירבש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות הברית עולם. תפילה, page 273. וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיח ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. Let's continue on page 278. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may we all live in such a way that this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat. And Shalom Rav is on page 282. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata hu melech Adon. pause for a moment of silent reflection. Just a second. I promise I'll be back, but I'm getting my Yeti. I call this my Yenti. I shouldn't be hold it like this so you can see I'm not advertising anything. I got this as a gift from Hospice of Central Pennsylvania. It's a long sermon, so I brought water. It is water. Shabbat Shalom. Rosh Hashanah is coming next Shabbat. And we are spending our time praying to God and wondering, who or what is God? Where should we look for God's presence? Our sages and philosophers are by no means unanimous in their response, but they do concur on one matter. Who or what God truly is ultimately unknowable. God is the hidden one, the one who conceals his face, the infinite, the immeasurable one, unknowable, unfathomable, indescribable, and yet these same sages also dare to try to capture our experience of God in images that we do know, that we can comprehend. Mystics went so far as to sketch God's form. Each of God's attributes was associated with a particular part of God's body. Biblical commentaries gave us images of God weeping at the sight of Egyptians drowning, bound in chains, forced into exile with his people. Liturgy shows us God as an immovable rock, as a shield, as the commander of a host of angels, as a shepherd, and on the days of awe, our prayer book focuses upon the image of God as our Father and as a King, or as we do here at our congregation, as a merciful parent. All these images are metaphors or allusions, never meant to be taken literally, merely meant to point us towards something we can imagine, but never really see. We all try at one time or another to imagine God, and it's never easy. Margaret Moore's Wenig is a rabbi living in New York City. Many years ago, she penned a sermon entitled, "God is a Woman, and She is Growing Older." She had the wonderful idea to think of God not as some supernatural deity, but as the person who symbolized Judaism to her in so many ways, her grandmother. Here in part is what she wrote. Today I invite you to imagine God along with me. I invite you to imagine God as a woman who is growing older. God is a woman and she is growing older. She moves more slowly now. She cannot stand erect. Her face is lined, her voice is scratchy. Sometimes she has to strain to hear. God is a woman and she's growing older, and yet she remembers everything. Every year on Rosh Hashanah, the anniversary of the day on which she gave us birth, God sits down at her kitchen table, opens up the book of memories, and begins turning the pages. And God remembers. There is the world when it was new, and my children when they were young. As she turns each page, she smiles, seeing before her, like so many dolls in a department store window, all the beautiful colors of our skin, all the varied shapes and sizes of our bodies. She marvels at our accomplishments, the music we have written, the gardens we have planted, the stories we have told, the ideas we have spun. They now can fly faster than the winds I send, she says to herself, and they sail across the waters which I gathered into seas. Then they visit the moon which I set in the sky, but they rarely visit me. There, pasted into the pages of her book, are all the Rosh Hashanah cards that were ever sent to her when we never wanted to bother to visit. She notices our signatures scrawled beneath the printed words that someone else composed. Then there are the pages she would rather skip, things she wishes she could forget. But they stare at her in the face, and she cannot help but remember. Her children spoiling the home she created for us, brothers putting each other in chains. She remembers seeing us racing down dangerous roads, herself unable to stop us. She remembers the dreams she had for us, dreams we never fulfilled. And she remembers the names, so many names inscribed in the book, names of all the children she lost through war and famine, earthquake, accident, and disease. And God remembers the many times she sat by a bedside weeping that she could not halt the process she herself set into motion. On Yom Kippur, before Yartzeit, God lights candles, each for one of her children, millions of candles lighting up the night, making it as bright as the day. God stays awake all night, turning the pages of her book. God is lonely, longing for her children, her playful ones. Her body aches for us. All that dwells on earth does indeed perish, but God endures. So she suffers the sadness of losing all that she holds dear. God is home, turning the pages of her book. Come home, she wants to say to us, come home, but she won't call, for she is afraid that we will say no. She can anticipate the conversation. We're too busy. We'd love to see you, but we just can't come. Too much to do. Even if we don't realize it, God knows that our busyness is just an excuse. She knows that we avoid returning to her because we don't want to look into her age. We don't want to see her worn face. It's hard for us to see a God who disappointed our childhood expectations. She didn't give us everything we wanted. She didn't make us triumphant in battle, successful in business, invincible to pain. We avoid going home to God to protect ourselves from our disappointment and to protect her. We don't want her to see the disappointment in our eyes, and yet God knows that it's there, but she still wants us to come home anyway. And what if we did? What if we did go home and visit God? What might it be like? God would usher us into her kitchen, seat us at her table, and pour us 2 cups of tea. She has been alone so long that there is so much she wants to say, but we barely allow her to get a word in edgewise, for we are afraid of what she might say, and we're afraid of silence too. So we fill an hour with our chatter, words, oh, so many words, until finally she touches her fingers to her lips and she says, "Shabbat, be still." Then she pushes back her chair and says, "Let me have a look at you." And she looks. And in a single glance, God sees us as both newly born and dying, coughing and crying, fearful of the unknown realm which lies ahead. In a single glance, she sees our birth and our death and all the years in between. She sees us as we were when we were young, when we idolized her and trustingly followed her anywhere, when our scrapes and bruises healed quickly, when we were filled with wonder at all things new. She sees us when we were young, when we thought that there was nothing we couldn't accomplish. And she sees our middle years too, when our energy was unlimited, when we kept house, cooked, cleaned, cared for children, worked, volunteered, when everyone needed us and we had no time for sleep. And God sees us in our later years, when we no longer felt so needed, when chaos disrupted our bodily rhythms and we learned to rely upon other things and other people. She sees us sleeping alone in a room which once slept 2. God sees things about us we have forgotten and things we do not yet know. For nothing is hidden from God's sight. When she is finished looking at us, God might say, "So tell me, how are you?" Now we are afraid to open our mouths and tell her everything she already knows. Whom we love, where we hurt, what we have broken or lost, what we wanted to be when we grew up. So we change the subject and say, "Remember the time when?" And God says, "Yes, I remember." Suddenly we're both talking at the same time. "I'm sorry that..." "That's all right, I forgive you," said God. "I didn't mean to." "I know that too." We look away. "I never felt I could live up to your expectations." And God answers us, "I always believed that you could do anything." "What about your future?" she asks us. We don't want to face our future. God hears our reluctance and she understands. After many hours of drinking tea, when at last there are no more words, God begins to hum. And we are transported back to a time when our fever wouldn't break and we couldn't sleep, exhausted from crying and unable to stop. She picked us up and held us close and kissed our foreheads to see if the fever had broken, and yes, that's where we learned to wipe the tears. It was from her we learned how to comfort a crying child, how to hold someone in pain. Then God reaches out and touches our arm, bringing us back to the present and to the future. She says, "You will always be my child, but you are no longer a child. Grow old along with me, the last of life for which the first was made." We are growing older as God is growing older. How much like her have we become? For us, as well as for God, growing older means facing death. Of course, God will never die, but she has buried more dear ones than we will ever love. In God, we see it's a holy thing to love what death can touch. Like her, we may be holy, loving what death can touch, including ourselves, our own aging selves. God holds our face in her two hands and whispers, "Do not be afraid. I will be faithful to the promise I made to you when you were young. I will be with you. Even to your old age I will be with you. When you have gray hair, still I will hold you. I gave birth to you, I carried you, I will hold you still. Grow old along with me. Our fear of the future is tempered now by curiosity. The universe is infinite. Unlimited possibilities are arrayed before us still. We can awaken each morning to wonder, what shall I learn today? What can I create today? What will I notice that I had never seen before? It has been a good visit. Before we leave, it is our turn to take a good look at her. The face which time has marked looks not frail to us now, but wise. For we understand that God knows things only the passage of time can teach, that one can survive the loss of a love, that one can feel secure even in the midst of an ever-changing world, that there is dignity in being alive even when every bone aches. God's movements seem not to slow us, but strong in intent, unlike our own. For we are too busy to see beneath the surface. We speak too rapidly to truly listen. We move too quickly to feel what we touch. We form opinions too fast to judge honestly, while God moves slowly and with intention. She sees everything there is to see, understands everything she hears, and touches all that lives. That is why we were created to grow older. Each added day of life, each new year makes us more like God, who is also growing older. That must be the reason we are instructed to rise before those who are aged and see the grandeur in their faces. God would prefer that we come home. She is waiting for us, ever patiently until we are ready. God will not sleep. She will leave the door open and the candles burning, waiting patiently for us to come home. That sermon has always been one of my favorites because Rabbi Wenig has said in a way that often escapes our own lips what we hope all of us will believe when we are lost and sick at heart. That God, no matter a he or a she, has strong arms, a warm heart, a caring soul, and the determination to be with us at the most difficult times in our lives. And when we live in difficult times, when we can't be with the ones we love or pray together in the synagogue that brings us joy, we have the option of thinking of God in a way that brings us comfort, as one who is unknown, as a miraculous, awe-inspiring miracle worker, or as our own grandmothers, sitting alone at a familiar formica table and drinking a glass of tea. Shabbat Shalom. Now we continue in our prayer books with Mishaberach on page 371. Blessings on everyone in need of healing, those who are physically ill, those who are emotionally ill, and those who are feeling sick at heart. May God bless them, and may God bless us all. We say Amen, and we say Baruch Atah Adonai, Rofeh HaCholim. We praise you, Adonai, our God, who heals the sick. We continue now with Aleinu on page 586. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adonai. those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. The Mourner's Kaddish is on page 598. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, v'yomad divrach cheruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, b'agalo v'zman pari v'yimaru amen, yehesh shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam umei amaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kudsha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, ta'amiran b'yama v'yimaru amen, yehe shlomo rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen, v'seh shalom b'imromav hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all of us who mourn, and comfort to all who are bereaved, and we say, Amen. Our closing hymn is Ein Eloheinu on page 626. Our God and God of our mothers and fathers, grant us a Shabbat filled with joy and rest, and a week ahead filled with good health and peace. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.